folks, we are at our last presentation of the day, and I will say, with no way is this a closing of a closing, because really this is a high point of the presentation as well, where we have former director, former Senator Paul Pinsky joining us. So instrumental in many of the monumental legislation that's passed in Maryland that's being implemented, the nationally known Climate Solutions Now Act, the effort for putting the right agricultural practices in place for dealing with the impacts from the poultry industry. All of these aspects and so many more have fallen under Paul Pinsky's belt while his time as senator and while his time as director of the Maryland Energy Administration. And so I'm really happy to introduce you, former Director Paul Pinsky. Thank you for being here. I'm going to turn it over for you to really bring this all together for us. We had day one of climate, day two of the environment. You're souped in both of those topics throughout your career here, and you've had such a impactful career leading us in these initiatives. And so I'm excited to hear what you have to say moving forward for the state of Maryland, given our pressures today, given our successes behind us, and the aspirational goals that we have moving ahead forward with us. So welcome, former Director Paul Pinsky, and the stage is yours.
Thank you, Matt. It's a pleasure being here and in being such esteemed company. My former colleagues, Secretary McElwain, Secretary Addicks, people I respect and have loved working with, and hopefully will continue to work in some way, shape, or form. Let me get right into it if I can, Matt. Currently with the laws on the books and the steps already taken, Maryland is one of the leading states in the nation when it comes to addressing climate change. That being said, that is not, however, the best bar to use to measure Maryland. We must look at our effort to move forward and achieve the goals that are currently in law or enunciated by state leaders like the governor. And I think we're pretty familiar with two of them. The Climate Solutions Now Act, which I had the honor of being the lead sponsor, called for a 60% reduction in greenhouse gases by 2031 and carbon net neutral by 2045. And as we know, the governor's called for achieving 100% clean energy. So the question is, where are we on those two goals, and what will it take for Maryland to achieve them? I mean, that's what's before us. But I think even more importantly is, what is the role of the people and organizations on the ground, the grassroots, the rank and file activists in pursuit of these goals? And that's what I want to focus my remarks on today, if that's acceptable. Look, the two goals, 100% clean energy and the 60% reduction, are heavy lifts. We know that it remains vitally important to keep up the momentum because the risk of inaction are extremely, they're very extreme. Even with the passing of the Climate Solutions Now Act in 2022, we've seen the number of fires and floods and hurricanes increasing, and the estimates of melting ice caps on top of that is an additional problem. If you watch the evening news, which I still do, either the first or second story leading the evening news virtually every night is fire, is flood, is hurricanes, melting ice caps. And I think back to the discussion during the Climate Solutions Now Act, and somebody asked me, is the 60% goal, is it aspirational? And I said, absolutely not. It's been passed into law, and now it's the time for action. Again, will it be heavy lift? Absolutely. Particularly with the Trump White House pulling in the other direction, fattening the coffers of his friends and contributors in the oil and fossil fuel industries. That creates an additional challenge that we didn't expect in 2022. Now, we heard from Secretary McElwain about 2 years ago. They put a blueprint together for implementing the Climate Solutions Bill. And they put in a number of markers as to how we achieve the goals of the Climate Solution Now Act. One of the markers was to spend $1 billion a year. And they describe actually the investments that need to be made. Now, to date, those investments have fallen short. They called for a cap and invest program. And while a study has been proposed, it hasn't become law. So we are off track, and some would have us retreat even more. Some expenditures have been made through the CEF fund. I know you talked about the CEF earlier this afternoon. While they fall short of the amount called for in the plan, it is important to keep up the pressure. The CEF is a critical component to making progress on slashing emissions from buildings, promoting energy, and in the area of transportation. Now, and the legislators still on the call will be very familiar with this. There have been efforts to divert funds from the CEF, and they should be viewed very, very critically. And I want to say this very carefully. Other than to plug short-term holes, if Maryland indeed faces a budgetary crisis, other than that situation, I believe diversions for other purposes should be opposed. There are a lot of people who want to use the CEF money for this project or that project, or to pay for this or pay for that. And that's dangerous because that CEF money is some of the only money being used to invest towards that $1 billion that Secretary McElwain's department has called for. I think it's worth going back and reviewing the components of that plan that was completed about 2 years ago. We need to put them in play. And let me mention one of them, and that's the building energy performance, or BEPS, and how critical that is. There's no reason why we can't require certain things on new construction. That new buildings are clean energy buildings. They use heat pumps, geothermal, solar, battery storage, and other technologies. Unfortunately, new construction is a very small percentage of housing stock, which leads back to strengthening and not backtracking on building energy performance. Energy in buildings is the second largest producer of greenhouse gases. The first is transportation. So, we can't forget that. Now, federal subsidies for EVs have gone away, and the emphasis on them has decreased, and that's a problem. We must expand the infrastructure so more people will buy EVs. I mean, people's anxiety about range and how many miles they can get or how far they can get is very real. And the more public-facing charges we have, the more it'll ease those concerns. Now, I'm reminded of a battle we fought many years ago before some of the listeners were around. It was originally called the 4P bill. The goal was to reduce NOx, SOx, SO2, mercury, and to reduce carbon dioxide by joining the newly formed Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, or RGGI, which is a cap and trade system among multiple states. It knocked around for a year or so, and it had support of environmental groups, but there was little movement. Well, we took a number of steps. First of all, we changed the name and called it the Healthy Air Act. We increased grassroots mobilization. We expanded the coalition to bring in nurses and doctors, public health advocates. The organization flooded the halls of Annapolis every Monday night. The organization pushed for commitments and created such a strong momentum that legislators could not duck the bill and supporting it. The bill became law, and we feel the effects today in our drive to reduce greenhouse gas and other pollutants. A similar situation developed about 2.5 years ago around the Climate Solutions Now Act. The bill was worked on for about 1.5 years, and in the year before its passage, the House eviscerated the bill, and we said, "Look, do we accept this? Do we want a half loaf? Was a half loaf enough?" And we decided no. And what was a fairly significant coalition doubled down and came back the next year, and the coalition, the grassroots, didn't let up, and it became law in Maryland. There are people who are friends of the environmental movement, but being a friend isn't enough. however good people's persuasion are, my former colleagues in the House and Senate, it's really the grassroots movements, you folks, who are the ultimate persuaders. It's important that people are held accountable. You ask for a commitment and you hold people to that commitment. And if necessary, you make them uncomfortable. Now we know we're going into an election year, and that is the ultimate measure of accountability. Do you want someone back or not? If someone who made a commitment on one of your initiatives defects, you need to make a lesson out of them and remove them. You knock on doors, you go on social media, you bombard the neighborhoods, voters with your message. And if you remove somebody who committed to you and then dropped off, and you remove them from office, it sends a powerful message to the other 146. So let me end with this. The first task is to set a clear progressive agenda, which I know part and parcel of this summit is whose purpose you're dealing with yesterday and today. And that agenda should push the envelope. It shouldn't be easy wins. We can't settle for where we are. We have to go forward. And once you've decided on that agenda, a progressive agenda, and you educated the grassroots around it and explain why they should own it, why they should care, then the effort is to mobilize people to write, to demonstrate, to fill the halls of Annapolis on Monday nights, and then let it be known with the 147 that there will be accountability. But finally, here's the most important point. It's following through on holding people accountable. You don't offer free passes, even to people who historically have been friends. So, look, I had wins, I had some losses. I tried to convince my colleagues why they should vote for something, but I don't care how great persuader I am. I'm not the person who makes a difference. It's having 20, 200, 2,000, 20,000 people writing, coming to Annapolis and saying, we need this bill and we need to count on you. And if we can't count on you, there could be consequences. So I think what you're doing this weekend, I know there's another summit in January, making a clear, focused agenda that has a push to it, that is not an easy, simple agenda, but really moves the ball. And then start pushing for commitments and not allowing people to back off and backpedal. And so, you have to not back off on that agenda. I don't think, as I mentioned earlier, you can back off on the C fund that goes to investing in clean energy. You can't divert it to pet projects that don't reduce greenhouse gases. There's a purpose to the C fund, and we should stay very true to it. So, look, I've been in government 39 years. I recently retired, as many of you know. I have always been an organizer. I've worked with environmental movement. Matt and I go back many, many years, visiting the Eastern Shore and river keepers. And I think those people who are still on the summit and the retreat have to take to heart owning the agenda, committing to working for the agenda. If you can't get to Annapolis and you can write emails, that's great. If you can come to Annapolis, bring signs, camp out in front of someone's door, that's terrific. Whatever it takes. But I think we aren't in a position, just because Maryland's one of the 3 or 5 or 6 leading states, to rest on those laurels. We have to push the envelope. 60% is our goal. It's in state law. It shouldn't be an aspiration. It's something we're pushed to achieve. And the governor's goal of 100% clean energy is something we can achieve and we should achieve. Thank you.
That was great. Former Director Pinsky, I really appreciate that. And you really brought it home on what the purpose of this summit is. And to hear it from you, somebody who is on the receiving end of the advocacy, right? You not only did you work with advocates, but you were also there and you understand what that commitment takes and what that commitment looks like. And I really appreciate those final words here moving. Now, you mentioned you're retired, and I know many of us wish you were really still in the game. And I'm sure you are in some ways. And just by your advice here today, we can tell that you're still very passionate and care very much about seeing these policies fully implemented and reaching the goals that have been set for it. And so I can't underscore enough of how important it is that we all engage in that action. You know, what you mentioned to me about getting commitments from others, that's where accountability starts. You know, until we can actually have the other people or have those decision makers commit to what we want or not commit, that's when we really know where accountability is going to lie. And so asking those hard questions, engaging in those tough discussions are really important for making sure that we're pushing our initiatives forward and doing so successfully. And so I want to thank you for wrapping everything up today and for your, almost 4 decades of leadership in the state politics and for the number of countless of meaningful and high impactful legislation that you brought forward. And then to end it all off with your time at the Maryland Energy Administration implementing that strong policy, the Climate Solutions Now Act. We all really thank you for your hard work and really appreciate your blessing to us and moving this stuff forward, continuing the legacy that you've set. So thank you very much, former director Paul Pinsky, for those kind words moving us forward.